in the country club section of Teaneck, so it's really special to be here. I want to open up with words about Shavuos that I share every year. I have a distinct philosophy that carries from Pesach through Shavuos, which is that I do not believe that every year you should say something new. I think that there are some ideas that you should share every year and frame the entire experience and the entire day. And I want to begin with that idea because I think it's that important. Tomorrow night is going to be Tikkun Leil Shavuos, and there is a minhag that's been adopted across kehilas across the world, and that is to stay up all night learning Torah. It is an extraordinarily strange custom. It's a strange custom that scholars and Rabbanim have looked at a lot. The Shla has a whole discussion explaining al pi Kabbalah why we stay up all night, why we try to stay up all night. Elliot Horowitz has a famous article that every rabbi at some point in their rabbinic career quotes that traces the custom of staying up all night to the proliferation of caffeine in the world. And it really only began as caffeine became more widely available. I want to share a different approach, and an approach that I think frames the entire Yontif, and I want to begin with it tonight, and that is the most basic reason of why we stay up all night is because Shavuos is the holiday where we got the Torah, and it makes sense on Shavuos night to learn a little bit of extra Torah. So we stay up all night and learn Torah. The problem is anybody who's ever even tried to stay up, even a little bit, you know the math does not work out. The math doesn't even close to work out. Because what happens is you sit down, you go to the shul. In earlier years, you'd go to shul, there'd be a fancy schmancy scholar in residence. And the scholar in residence gives out, his 30-packet, source sheets. And you take it there and you're like, wow, this will take me through the night. You start the shir and it's really exciting and you're motivated and you're on page 3 of the source sheet and you start to, doze off a little bit. You wake up, he's on page 17, you're still on page 3. You don't know what's going on. So you say, you know what, I'll take a coffee break. You go, you take a coffee, you have a little black and white cookie, a little cheesecake, a little rugelach, and you sit there and say, you know what, I'm not going to go to jail, I'll learn with a chavrusa. And you go and you learn with a chavrusa one-on-one, friends, family, and the coffee and the danishes and the rugelach are all swishing around in your body. And all of a sudden, your shuckles start to get a little slower. They start to get a little more, the shuckle that starts to transition into the micro nap. And before you know it, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're covered in rugelach, and you haven't learned the word, and your next day is totally shot. Because even if you go to sleep now and you stayed up, you learned 3 pages of a Makomoshi that you fell in the middle of. You had 11 bathroom breaks if you had 11 cups of coffee this night and right before Kol Nidre is when most Jews go to the bathroom. And then all of a sudden you're covered in rugelach and what are you doing already? And your next day, you have to tell your spouse that, do you mind if I take a quick nap before the meal? You wake up 3:30 in the afternoon, the kids are jumping on the bed. Your spouse resents you. It doesn't make any sense. What are we doing? It would make more sense. You have a late meal. You learn for 15 minutes. Get a full night's sleep. All the shuls shut down the Tikkun Leil Shavuos, and the next day you'll get 2-3 hours of real Torah learning extra. If that question doesn't bother you, then you've never even attempted the insanity of staying up all night. But I want to tell you the approach that my Rebbe told me when I was studying in yeshiva, and it's an approach that I begin every single year in Shavuos, and God willing, I live close enough. This won't be the last time that we're sharing Torah pre-Shavuos or on Shavuos. And that is when I was studying in Baltimore near Yisroel, my Rebbe, Ritzi Berkowitz, he framed the whole thing. It doesn't make sense. And he looked at everybody in the classroom and he said, but you know what? When you're in love, you do crazy things. Because when you're in love, you do crazy things. And right away, the entire frame of mind of what Shavuos night is about, of getting on a Zoom call at 10:45 at night is about, tomorrow night even attempting post a meal, post cheesecake, post lasagnas, post noodles, anything after noodles is hard. And all of a sudden we're sitting down and we're sharing Torah. Why are we doing that? Because when you're in love, you do crazy things. Like the Medrash, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says in the Medrash, Vayash came Abraham baboker. Abraham got up early. He jumped out of bed. He couldn't sleep. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, why is that? Because ahava mikalkelas es hashura. When you're in love, love mikalkelas breaks down hashura, the sequential. You had plans, you had ideas when you meet somebody and you start dating. So you can have plans. We'll go to Build-A-Bear. We'll go to a restaurant. I'll drive you home. But once you're in a relationship, once you're in love, the plans, the directions, the schedule, none of it matters. You want to stay up all night with the person. You want to talk all night. Ahava mekalkel says hashura, and I believe that is the mind frame, that is the frame of mind that we need to enter in with Shavuos. Even if 10:45 at night, we don't have a halt cup to go through any Hebrew sources, whatever it is, and tomorrow night you're tired and you think, should I open up a sefer? Am I really going to do anything? When you're in love, you do crazy things. It doesn't make sense, and that's why we try, and that's why we do it anyways. So I want to share tonight a idea about the uniqueness of the revelation of Torah through the lens of one of my favorite topics, which is late night television. I send out emails from NCSY, and I recently sent out an email where I said my educational mentor is someone named Lorne Michaels. He's the producer of Saturday Night Live, and the chachma in which he is able to constantly be creative, to manage creative people, to think on the fly, has always been an inspiration to me. And he says two things that always stuck with me. Number one, he says about Saturday Night Live, it's a live show on Saturday nights, and he always says the show doesn't start because it's 11:30. The show doesn't start because it's ready. It starts because it's 11:30. We're never ready for a live show. Something wrong is going to happen. It's never going to be perfect. We go on because it's 11:30. And that's what it feels like this year. We're not ready. We don't have all the preparations. We don't have, we got 1,000 emails from 1,000 organizations, 1,000 Zoom calls of what to learn. We're not going to be ready, but that's not why we start. We start because it's 11:30, because it's time for Shavuos. It's time to go live. So I want to share with you, I'm going to share with you my Mar Makomos. And if you're, I'm going to really get in there so you can really see it. And if you have trouble, you can use the chat function if you have trouble seeing it. But I want to talk about my educational lessons from late night television, which, as you will see, has a lot to do not only with the revelation of Torah in general, but the revelation of Torah that we're specifically going through now with all of the chaos of this pandemic. So I can't tell from the different faces on the call, but if I were to guess, and I were to ask people on the call, who is the prototypical host of late night television, looking at the different faces on the Zoom call, it looks like we have a wide variety. There are people here who close their eyes, and the prototypical host of late night was Johnny Carson. Maybe there are a couple people here who still remember Jack Parr and Steve Allen. I certainly don't remember, but I'm a student of late night television. And after Johnny Carson left, Jay Leno took over, and after Jay Leno, which was a very messy handoff because they thought they were going to give it to Letterman, they gave it to Conan O'Brien. And they gave it to Conan O'Brien, and there's a fabulous book written by Bill Carter called The War for Late Night. He's the New York Times columnist on late night television, and he covers this entire battle. They gave the show to Conan O'Brien, The Tonight Show, started by Steve Allen, Jack Parr, Johnny Carson, Jay Leno. And they gave it to Conan O'Brien, this person who was not a big star. He was a writer for The Simpsons. And after being on the show for just a few months, they decided they were going to push him out. They wanted to move the show later. And he wrote a letter basically explaining why he's leaving the show. And he says because it's his allegiance to the institution of The Tonight Show. In the second paragraph, it says over here, 6 years ago, I signed a contract with NBC to take over The Tonight Show in June of 2009. Like a lot of us, I grew up watching Johnny Carson every night, and the chance to one day sit in that chair has meant everything to me. I worked long and hard to get that opportunity, passed up far more lucrative offers, and since 2004, I've spent literally hundreds of hours thinking of ways to extend the franchise long into the future. It was my mistaken belief that, like my predecessor, Jay Leno, I would have the benefit of some time and, just as important, some degree of rating support from the primetime schedule. Building a lasting audience at 11:30 is impossible without both. And he basically says in this letter that he is deciding to step away from The Tonight Show. The fact that NBC wants to move the show back and play around with the timing is going to ruin the franchise. Now, there's something remarkable that that Bill Carter reports in this book, The War for Late Night. This is a fabulous book. Anybody who's interested in management or in the kind of the politics of production, even if you don't like television, you don't like late night, it's too silly, it's too cow. This is a very worthwhile read. It's really, really insightful. At the end of the book, there's an epilogue. And just to be clear, to just explain my affiliations, I'm a Conan guy. I love Conan O'Brien. He's brilliant. He's a Harvard graduate. He's super bright. But in the end, there is a conversation that he quotes in the epilogue that is a conversation with Jerry Seinfeld, where Jerry Seinfeld says Conan O'Brien made a mistake. Look at the second to last paragraph over here. Observing, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can really get in there and see it. Here we go. I'll start a little earlier. I'm going to start over here. As they talked about comedy business they love, Jerry Seinfeld said to Johnny Carson, in my entire career as a stand-up, one of the things endlessly debated in every comedy club I was ever in was, who do you think is going to take over The Tonight Show when Johnny leaves? For like 20 years, I had that conversation. And the one thing none of us realized was that when you left, you were taking it with you. Johnny had broadly agreed, Jerry said later. The point Jerry explained was that the show, the way Johnny did it, the institution, as people called it, effectively ended the day he walked off the stage. After that, what was left? A time slot, another guy in it, and a name that essentially meant nothing. Because Seinfeld pointed out, nobody in the business ever said, I'm doing The Tonight Show. Instead, they all said, I'm doing Jay, I'm doing Dave, referring to David Letterman, I'm doing Conan. Observing the NBC events of late 2009 and early 2010, Seinfeld found himself astonished at the psychic bloodletting that had taken place all over a chair on a studio set, a television show, and whether that show would begin at this time or another time a half hour later. Nobody ever uses these show names, Jerry said, his voice hitting the high register familiar from his routines when he addressed the most mind-boggling absurdities of life. These names are fake words, a little censorship. I'm sorry about that. How do you not get that this whole thing is phony? It's all fake. There's no institution to offend. All of this, I won't sit by and watch the institution damage. He's criticizing Conan. It's not about the institution. What institution? Ripping off the public? That's the only institution. We tell jokes and they give us millions. Who's going to take over late night or late show or whatever the heck it's called? Nobody's going to take it over. It's Dave. When Dave's done, that's the end of it. And then another guy comes along and has to do his thing. That to me is an obvious essential of show business that you eventually grasp. Somehow that seems to have been missed by some of the people here. If I haven't lost you by spending so much time talking about late night television already, I think this is such a profound point for the period of time that we are in. It's a rumination on the difference between personal relationships and institutions. And right now, all of us are living in a Yiddishkeit where it's not about the institution. It's about building and finding the personal relationship. We can't rely on the institution, the Tonight Show, our synagogues, our shuls, our schools, provide us that Yiddishkeit. There's no institution. You're either inspired and engaged in Yiddishkeit and able to bring it into your living room, or you can't. We can't rely on the institutional names, so to speak. As prestigious as the Tonight Show is, as important as our shuls and schools are, ultimately, the only thing we can rely on is that personal relationship. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about tonight. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos has a fascinating description about the creation of the world. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos explains that the world was created, as many of you are familiar with, Ba'asara ma'amaros nivra ha'olam. With 10 sayings, the world was created. And if you open up the first parek of Sefer Bereshis, you can count 9 times that the word Vayomer is used. The 10th time, it says there are 10. If you count, there are only 9 Vayomers. The 10th Vayomer is actually, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says, the phrase of Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz. It's not said with a Vayomer, it's a mimer susum, like a closed, a subtle, hidden mimer, because the verb Vayomer is not said to introduce it. It just needs to be accepted, that Bereshis. But it's always struck me as so strange the way that we frame the creation of the world through the language of a mimer through speech. And in fact, as you know, on Shavuos, we celebrate the giving of the Torah, of Matan Torah, and the Aseres Hadibros. Quick trivia question. Maybe we'll open up the chats for this. How do we know there are Aseres Hadibros? Who says there's more than 10 mitzvos in there? It's more than 10 psukim. How do we even know that there are 10 dibros? Anybody can log in on? Are we allowed to chat on here? I don't see a chat function. We are allowed to chat on here.
Yeah.
You can put your guesses in the chat. How do we even know there are 10? Where do we get that from? But we know what's interesting is that we have Asara Ma'amaros. We have Asara Ma'amaros where the world was created. And we have Aseres Hadibros where the Torah, so to speak, was created and revealed. And in an interesting parallel, the same way that the first mimer is not introduced with a clear verb of Vayomer, but a mimer susum, a closed revelation of Bereshis bara Elokim, the same is true with the Aseres Hadibros. The first Dibbur was not said with a tzivoi. It just says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It doesn't say, Anochi Ehyeh, I will be, I'm commanding you to believe. It's also a mimer susum. There's clearly a parallel, and they're both described with the language of speech, mimer and Dibbur. There is a fabulous medrash that is probably the first medrash that most children are taught. It's the first picture in my favorite book and Sefer on Chumash that some of you may be familiar with, called The Little Midrash Says, the blue volume, the one with Yaakov sleeping on the rocks on the cover. And the first image in the Little Midrash Says is you see a little letter Aleph who's like screaming, pick me, pick me. And that is the Medrash in Yalkut Shimoni, which says, and I have it at the bottom over here, Elu Chazbeis Osios Bahen Nitna Kala Torah. These are the 22 letters that the Torah was given, Ubisha Shebikes Livra Es Ha'olam, and when God wanted to create the world, Yardu Va'aru Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Zeh Omer Lefanav Bi Tivra Es Ha'olam. Every letter of the 22 letters came before God, like as depicted in the Little Midrash Says. It said, pick me, I want to be that person. I want to be the person to create the world with. And after all of them, the bays came in. Amar lefanav, and said before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rabbono shel olam, ritzoncha shetivra bi ha'olam. You want to create the world with me, Bereshis, because I start with the word Baruch, and then at the very end over here, I'm going to highlight it so you see where I am. It says the Aleph, the letter Aleph, Kevin Shara, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiba Livras Ha'olam Bebeis. Once he saw God made the decision to create the world with the bays, Amad lo litzad echad v'shasa. It's such a moving midrashic imagery that the aleph was silent, aside from the fact that the aleph literally is a voiceless letter of the aleph base. The aleph doesn't make a sound like the other letters in the aleph base. It's unarticulated. So in this story, the aleph itself is at the side and it's quiet until God calls the aleph over. Why are you being so quiet? And the aleph says, God, I'm not so important, I'm not so great, but I want to be included in this. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, and at the very last, the last line of this paragraph, he says, Hey Shiva HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God answered the aleph, the Amar Lo, such a beautiful medrash. Al tisyare, don't be afraid. Ata rosh lekulam kemelech. You're going to be in charge of all of them. Ata echad, va'ani echad, v'hatorah achas, sha'ani asen litain Torah b'cha la'ami Yisrael. I'm going to give the Torah to you, to the Jewish people. Shene'emar anochi Hashem Elokecha ad kan the medrash. So we have this amazing imagery of the letters that God chooses to create the world. And it's very deliberate that the world is created with the letter Beis, and the Torah begins with the letter Aleph. So what is this? Is this cute imagery, or is this something real? So if you ask the Ibn Ezra, who is, the very serious, he's the rationalist and the more cerebral. So he says that's cute for the little midrash says. But this isn't a midrash that you need to take seriously. He says, Gam yesh dorashu tov la'acherem. There's another explanation that others like. I don't like it. A little passive-aggressive jab at the medrash. It's a good way to educate children. The little midrash says it's not a real medrash, because he says the Ibn Ezra, it doesn't really make any sense. The reason why the Torah says the word Beis was picked to create the world is because the letter Beis starts with bracha, so it's a good letter. The Ibn Ezra says that's ridiculous. There are a lot of bad words that start with a Beis too. Look over here. He says, V'im hadavar kacha. If that's why God picked the Beis, because the Beis bavor bracha, because it's blessed. So it says bokeh ka'aretz ubolka vashisu, but all these words, all of these words are about destruction, devastation. They also begin with a Beis. Beis isn't such a good word. So why is it that the Torah deliberately begins with the letter Beis? The world was created with the letter Beis, and the Torah starts with the letter Aleph. So the Maharal says something amazing responding to the Ibn Ezra. And he says as follows, V'hinei devarim elu megalim l'cha devarim gedolim. This medrash about why the world was created, Bereshis, with the letter Beis, and why the Torah was revealed with the letter Aleph, is actually something very important. V'zeki ha-Beis befrad hu hatchalas hariboy. Beis is the beginning of multiplicity. It's the first letter of choice. Kahari ha-Aleph ein bo riboy. Aleph, one, is still singular, still unitary. V'ilu ha-Beis hu hatchalas hariboy v'hu bracha. Blessing, success, choice is the ability to have options. When I was in college, I had a very, very wealthy roommate, extraordinarily wealthy. And we one time had a meal together at another wealthy person's house. I was the one person, I'm a regular Joe. But we were sitting there, and this older person asked my roommate, he said, for all the wealth that you have, what does it give you? What does wealth give you? And my roommate didn't miss a beat. He's a very smart, very sharp guy. And he gave a one-word answer. He says, options. Doesn't give me happiness. Doesn't give me a great family. Doesn't give me joy. I have options. Other people, when they have to get to work, they have to, they've got one way that's economically feasible, maybe. They've got certain job options, certain opportunities. I've got a gazillion options to do a lot of things. I don't know that I'm any happier. I just happen to have more options. That's the base of bracha. It gives you options. You have multiple ways to do things. That's why bracha, this choice, this possibility, begins with Beis because Beis is the beginning of that duality. But the Aleph, says the Maharal, is all about unity. It's about clarity. And that's why the Torah begins with the Aleph. And this is where he responds to the Ibn Ezra with this arrow over here. Ubavadai, the Ibn Ezra, Bal Yodim Divrei Chachamim Hanemonim, Ki Dvarim Him Emes B'Chachma. The Maharal and the Ibn Ezra kind of, they bump heads a little bit. There's obviously a lot of respect for one another. Like the Ramban says about the Ibn Ezra, he says it's a Tochacha Megula v'Ahava Mesuteres. I openly rebuke you, but I have a hidden love for you. Hulo Haven Divrei Chachma. Ki Davar Zeh Sheheshiv, the Ibn Ezra, Ma Sheheshiv HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Tes, Ki Osios Kulim B'Vadai, Mishamshin L'Tov, Misharshin L'Ra Gamkin, K'moshe Amarnu. Aval HaBeiz, Lo B'Lashon Levad Ka'amar, El HaBeiz Hu Bracha Be'etzem. Braise, it's not about the fact that it starts the word bracha. The whole concept of Beis, the second letter, the beginning of multiplicity, the beginning of choice, is what is indicative of bracha in the first place. Now I want to return to our earlier question. If the world was created with a Beis to show the world and the ability to have choice and the ability to have different possibilities, and Torah was given with the letter Aleph, because the Aleph has the clarity and the unity. I've always wondered, why is it that they are described, one as being created with the Asara Ma'amaros, and the other as being described with the Asaras Hadibros? What, in fact, is even the difference between a mimer and a Dibbur? What's the difference when the Torah says Vayedaber versus Vayomer? I mean, they sound the same. They're translated kind of the same. Different saying and speaking. What exactly is that distinction? Why is it that in the revelation of the Torah, we use the language of Aseres Hadibros, which is a pasuk? The Torah itself describes them, back to my earlier trivia question. The Torah itself, I believe in Parshas Akev, describes them as Aseres Hadvarim, the 10 sayings. That's how we know there are 10 of them. It's more than 10 mitzvahs, more than 10 psukim. And the world was created with the language of Vayomer, of Ma'amaros. What is the difference between a mimer and a Dibbur? So I've asked this question a lot of times. I'm going to ask the question a second time, but I'm going to ask it differently this time. Jason, what's the difference between a mimer and a Dibbur? So he's saying he doesn't know. But I asked the question twice. The first time nobody responded. The second time Jason spoke up. When I asked the question the second time, is the very distinction between a mimer and a Dibbur. A mimer is when you are addressed with a question that is thrown out to a broad audience. You don't need to respond because nothing was addressed to you specifically. It's open. You could choose to respond, you could not choose to respond. But the moment that somebody is asked, Jason, what is the difference? Aliza, what is the difference between a mimer and a Dibbur? All of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, is this one of these interactive things? Like, can we not? All of a sudden, you're not being confronted by words, you're being confronted by a speaker. And that's the difference. In mimer, the world was created by Asaras Ma'amaros. That was a question, that was an idea that was taken and given to the world. But we weren't confronted with an author. When I speak to Jason and say, Jason, what do you think the difference is? All of a sudden he has to take his phone on and zoom off mute. Aliza's got to fumble and shrug her shoulders, respond. Because that time, I didn't ask the question to the whole Zoom. I asked it to Aliza, I asked it to Jason. I looked at Bruno. I see who's on my screen. I'm sorry, I'm picking on some of you. That's nothing personal, I promise. There's something very interesting about the difference between the word mimer and Dibbur. And the Radak pointed out. The Radak in his Sefer HaShorashim says, in Shoresh Dibbur, he says, Ki ha-Dibbur, the source right over here, Ki ha-Dibbur mora al ikar ha-Dibbur shehu ba'adam. The Dibbur, when we talk about it, it's talking about the speaker. Kamo shene'emar Chai medaber v'lo ne'emar chai omer. We don't have a noun that uses the word vayomer to describe a speaker. There's no such thing as a ma'amer. There's such a thing as a medaber. There's no such thing as a ma'amer. Because the difference between the revelation of the world versus the revelation of the Torah is the difference between being confronted with words and being confronted by a speaker, being confronted by an author. There's an amazing book by Kurt Vonnegut. It's probably, I don't know, Rabbi Rothwax isn't on the call, so I can recommend it. A lot of his books are a little racy, but there's an amazing book called Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. And there's an amazing scene in the book where one of the characters of the book is sitting in a bar and he has this trembling feeling, this like strange feeling that somebody dramatic and cataclysmic is walking up next to him. And all of a sudden, inside the book, the character is confronted by Kurt Vonnegut, the author himself. And the character all of a sudden realizes that the strangeness, the eeriness of the experience is from the fact that he's no longer part of a story of words, he's actually in dialogue with the author himself. And that's the difference between the Beis of Bereshis versus the Anochi, the Aleph of Anochi. The world was created with the letter Beis because the world is choice. The world is choice because if you look at the world and you look at nature, you can decide to respond with spirituality. You can decide to kind of dismiss it. You could ignore it. You could not respond to it. It's a question. It's a mimer. You could just not make eye contact with the speaker. He's not going to bother you. But the Aleph of Anochi is a unity and a clarity that demands a response because the person talking to us is no longer just a Vayomer. It's now the Medaber. It's now we're being confronted by a speaker. And this Reb Tzadok HaKohen Melublin says so beautifully, and it's really remarkable where he got this. I think the last time I spoke in Beth Aaron many years ago, probably forgot by then, but I did talk about Reb Tzadok. My master's thesis is in the works of Reb Tzadok. And Reb Tzadok writes, he was born in 1823, he died in 1900. Reb Tzadok was a Talmud of the Ishbitzer. And normally when he writes in his Svarim, when he writes in his work, the Ishbitzer was very controversial. I can't explain everything why he was controversial, but he was extraordinarily controversial. So when the Reb Tzadok quotes him in his Svarim, he usually says, Ukach kibalti. So a lot of people over here in this line, Reb Tzadok writes, Ukamoshe shamati, as I've heard. They think he's quoting the Ishbitzer. He's not. In another place, Reb Tzadok explains, and he actually read this in a non-Jewish, a Christian book as a child, and it stuck with him so much that he incorporated it into his Svarim. I wrote an article about it on the Svarim blog about 10 years ago, trying to find out what book this was. And you could find that online. But Reb Tzadok has this beautiful analogy, and he writes as follows, Ukamoshe shamati, Ki Hashem Yisbarach asa sefer, v'hu ha'olam, u'perish al oso sefer, v'hu ha'torah. God wrote a book, and it is called The World, u'perish, and a commentary on that book, v'hu ha'torah, and that is the Torah. Ki ha'torah kamo mefarish kinyane Hashem Yisbarach ben Avram. The Torah shows us how to acquire God, how to access God in the world. Like Ma Rabu Ma'asecha, Mola Ha'aretz Kinyanecha, as the Tzadok quotes from Simcha Banav of Peshischa, Mola Ha'aretz Kinyanecha, the world is filled with your possessions. He rereads it, Mola Ha'aretz Kinyanecha, the world is filled with which to acquire you by. So how do we acquire God? Rav Tzadok flips the analogy. Usually we know from Bereshis Rabbah, God istakel ba'araisa ubara alma. He looked in the Torah to create the world. This flips the analogy on its head and says, no, the world is the book and the commentary is the Torah. Why is this? It's exactly what we're saying. If you want to meet an author, don't read their book. Their book Who knows how you're going to interpret it? It's not going to have the authorial intent. You may not be able to necessarily connect to the author, understand the author. If you want to understand an author, if you want to understand a director, you have to watch the DVD extras. You have to watch the commentary. You have to look at their running commentary of what did you want us to do with all of this. That's the Aleph of the Torah and the Medaber that is revealed through the Aseres HaDibros. And this is something remarkable. And we're going to end with this. This is wild. This is a wild reading of the Gemara. I've never seen anybody else point this out. The Gemara in Kiddushin says as follows. My dichsiv, why is it written? The Gemara Kiddushin writes, Yodu Hashem kol malchei aretz ki shamu imrei ficha. All of the kings of the land admitted to you because they heard imrei ficha, the mimer, the words of your mouth. Mimer ficha lo nemar, ela imrei ficha. It doesn't say mimer ficha singular, it says imrei plural. Says the Gemara, B'shah sha'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when God said, Anochi v'lo yihi elecha, Amru umos ha'olam. The rest of the world said, God's just trying to do self-promotion. He's trying to get people to believe in him. Once they heard the second, later on the commandments, they have to honor your parents. Chazru v'hodu l'ma'amaros harishonos. They went back and admitted to the earlier ma'amaros. Wait a second. Pause. I just built a whole shir. The Torah itself describes them as the Aseres HaDibros. Why on earth is this the one place in this Gemara in Kiddushin that's referring to the revelation of the Aseres HaDibros and calling them ma'amaros? It makes no sense. It's darshan from this pasuk in Tehillim, Yodu Hashem kol malchei aretz ki shamu imrei ficha, these two things. They heard Anochi, they heard Kabbalas Avicha Esimecha, and then they said, you know what, we're going to back off. Chazru v'hodu l'ma'amaros harishonos. It's not talking about the ma'amaros of the world. It's talking about the Aseres HaDibros. Why are they calling them ma'amaros here? So this is beautiful, and it's exactly along the lines of what we've been saying until now. When I look at Jason and I say, Jason, what's the difference between a mimer and a Dibbur? I teach in classrooms all the time. So Aliza, I'm not talking to Aliza right now. I just called on Jason. But every classroom has somebody else who's listening into the conversation, who also hears what's going on. For Jason, when I call and speak to Jason in particular, that's a Dibbur for Jason. He's being confronted by me, the speaker, the author, and he has to respond. If Aliza overhears that conversation and chooses to speak up, she didn't hear a Dibbur because I wasn't speaking uniquely to Aliza. That Aleph of the Medaber wasn't directed towards Aliza. Aliza heard a mimer. Aliza just heard a question that she decided to poke her head up in. Again, Aliza, Jason, I'm so sorry that you've become a central part of this, what was supposed to be a non-interactive class. That's my apologies. The reason why the Gemara describes the Aseres HaDibros as ma'amaros in this one place is because it's talking about the Umos HaOlam. God wasn't speaking directly to them. They overheard the conversation. When you overhear a conversation between me and Jason, between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lahavdil, and Klal Yisrael, then the person overhearing, it's ma'amaros harishonos. They're only hearing a mimer. Because the beauty of Torah and the beauty of Shavuos is connecting to the mimer, to the Dibbur, the Medaber, the author. And that, I believe, is why we began with the difference between the Tonight Show and Johnny Carson. Because it's not about tuning into an institution. Yiddishkeit is not built through institutions. Yiddishkeit is built from relationships. As Seinfeld told Conan, nobody cares about the shows. We don't care that you've got the fancy title and a membership here and you got this aliyah and this covenant and this and that. The institutions are not at the center. Sure, it's important. It gives you access. It's got a time. It's got a chair. What really matters, nobody says, I'm doing the Tonight Show. They say, I'm doing Dave, I'm doing Conan. And this Shavuos night, when we're with our families, it's not about the institution. It's about the people. It's about our relationship with our children, with our families, with our siblings, and with ourselves, and building those personal, quiet relationships outside of the auspices of the Heilige institutions that we need and that are important. But the place to build the relationship is that personal connection with the author, with the speaker, with the medaber. Wishing everybody a good Yontif, a Chag Sameach. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a great Yontif. Feel free to reach out if you want any of the sources. I'm happy to email them out. My email address, dbash@ou.org. The fastest way. You can find me on Twitter. Have a great Yontif. Chag Sameach. All the best.
Thank you.